This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
Welcome to humanity. Welcome, listeners of Welcome to Humanity. This is Dr. Fred, and it's really just a pleasure, an honor, a privilege to be with you today. Secondly, it's a privilege, an honor, and a pleasure to introduce you to my guest today. My guest today is a good friend, a really great friend, a man who really resonates with me, but a man who I think resonates with the vibrations of the entire planet, even though he doesn't know it. From his perspective, my guess is that he thinks maybe the rest of the planet is a beat off, and oops, sorry about that phrase, is an offbeat. So today I'm going to introduce you to my good friend and pal, and also my Rolfer, Harvey Ruderian. Harvey, welcome to the show. Welcome to Humanity. It's just great to have you as a guest.
Well, thank you. I actually want to acknowledge you for your insight. I do feel that the planet's a little bit offbeat, and maybe a beat off.
Yeah.
But, partly because that's my work, is I'm a tuning fork.
Mm-hmm. That's excellent. Go ahead. Say more about that. I mean, my next question was going to be, who are you? So you've already started with that. So
yeah, I would have never thought of such a thing. But since, we're just doing this as we do all the time when we talk, whatever comes up. But in fact, there is only truth to be told when we speak from our heart. Mm-hmm. And, when we speak from our heart, then we're actually in harmony. Mm-hmm. And harmony is actually in sync. It's in beat. Even though everybody's harmony is different, I think everybody's got their own code. I think that there really are ways in which we synchronize with the earth. And that, in fact, that synchronization, that harmonic, that tonality is so powerful that, in fact, the life we live, in many ways, the life you live, the life I live, and our conversations are about oftentimes, how is it that the world, what an interesting dilemma that we as mankind, get born in harmony and then we drift off. Mm-hmm. Like, what an interesting phenomena. We have all these stories, but you, Mr. Wise Man, Baba Fred, and myself, I've been doing this professionally for, 47 years, and on the journey for 50, 52, 53 years, being 73-year-old man. It's still that's still a very fascinating, question. And we've certainly come up with ways to process really deeply. We've learned about the unconscious, the shadow, and we've learned, ways to really listen. And I think that listening, when we talk about being in beat, in harmony, I think in many ways that one word has resonated for so many years and continues, even though the journey to listening is, how deeply can you listen? How deeply? Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm. When somebody walks in your door, when somebody walks in my office, how deeply can I listen is, in fact, my journey. Because how deeply I listen allows them the ease, the freedom that comes with being actually heard. Oftentimes in my practice, I'm astounded that people tell me that they've never been heard before.
Isn't that great? Exactly.
I mean, and what an alchemy that creates. That actually is another one of those, wow, what a mystery. That actually what we want to be more than anything else is we want to be received, right? Which is being heard.
Completely. As you already know, I meet lots of incredible people who are up to really big things in this world. Harvey Ruderian is absolutely no exception to this, to say the least. No matter whether we're tackling some of the largest problems in the world or even the tiny ones, we all face challenges internally and externally. Now, I've been a psychiatrist for lots of years, and I've worked with all kinds of people from all walks of life, from various backgrounds, dealing with more issues than you can imagine, of all sizes and shapes. So, naturally, over time, I've developed a number of ways to assist others in gaining a new sense of freedom and empowerment. I pulled back the curtain on one of these methodologies, and I'm publicly revealing the process and associated mindset that contributes to using this particular method with maximum effectiveness. It's all laid out in my new book called The Creative 8, and you can pick it up right now on Amazon.com in either Kindle or paperback format. Just go to welcometohumanity.net/creative and download your free audiobook copy of The Creative 8 today. I look forward to hearing about your Creative 8 breakthroughs. Now, let's get back to our exciting conversation with Harvey Ruderian.
Welcome to humanity.
What we lose very young in life is, in fact, it was actually one of my sort of indirect mentors. I did many workshops with him, and I know you've done a lot with his predecessors. Warren Earhart said something brilliant once. We were doing a workshop. Who knows? I did so many with him. And he said, when a baby is reaching out, baby's not saying, please love me. The baby is saying, please receive me.
Mm-hmm.
Please see me. Please hear me.
Mm-hmm.
So when we do listen, when we listen deeply, besides listening deeply from our stillness, brings such incredible harmonics from the earth, which is, the truths of Gaia, just comes right up through our sacrum, which means sacred, our sacred bone. It moves right through us, which moves through our lower centers, which are our deep instincts, which is actually what gets cut off very early on when a child is not acknowledged for who they are, not for what they do. And that was another one from Est, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be, do have,
Mm-hmm.
not do have be. Remember that one?
Yes, yeah. I do. Absolutely.
Yeah. You come from your beingness. And when beingness is acknowledged, not for its doing, but simply for its divine spirit, when you recognize that the person that walks in your room, that walks in my room, certainly walks in with all their ancestors and all of their stories. But what I'm listening to is the harmonic of their spirit. Mm-hmm. While I acknowledge their story, I'm not looking to fix their story.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as you listen to their divinity, their perfection, the person who is already whole, then the relaxation that got tied up and contracted, maybe back the first 3 minutes of their life, that beginning contraction, which we used to call in the S trainings number ones, which turned into number twos and number threes, and we're living our whole life building of a life around threes. But when you actually listen in a way that allows for the small little tetherings to relax, the person is like suddenly, they don't even use the word, but in fact, the word love shows up inside their being. And they trust, because that's what got lost. When that break of that original early covenant, which is a God-given covenant, when you're born, nature says, receive this child. And when it's not received, it starts to distrust. And one of my wishes, if I had a wish, would be that, probably in the terms of politics, the health of a child care, somehow, if we can learn to establish trust at a young age, so many of those problems, so many things we see. But that's essentially what happens, is that then all of a sudden there's a trust. And when there's a trust, a deep part of our spirit, it's actually something I touch with my hands. We've done work with it. It's something, the most mysterious thing of all. When two people meet, there I'll be. That saying from the Old Testament. When you really listen to them, listening to you, listening to them, when you really encounter, it's a great word, encounter, when you really take their whole being in, and you really give it an affirmation with no judgment, no A, B, C, D grades. When you really, really acknowledge who they are in your heart, in your heart of hearts, because your hearts start to resonate, a person starts to self-organize. I mean, we have within us a self-organizing principle. Otherwise, we wouldn't be surviving because there would be no homeostasis, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in a sense, that's what evolution is. It's moving to higher and higher levels. You know, I love this. I love your name, Welcome to Humanity, because we always say in the healing world that the heart is where humanity lives.
Mm.
And so often at that young age, it's the lower instincts. It's the gut, you know, that gets frozen. The sexuality that gets frozen, you know, Wilhelm Reich, all the Reichian work, you know, all those early workshops, which I was privy to because I grew up in the 60s. And so we did all that stuff, you know. We did all that stuff while we protested the war, which was one of my, when I look back, you know, it's like you say oftentimes, I've heard you say, and then that became a healing, you know.
Yeah.
Some dark night of the soul, you know, when recognized, you know, is food for composting, you know, some of our deepest angst.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, absolutely mandatory if we want to move up the chain, you might say, of the evolutionary scale, you know, into the humanity, which is our heart, where all people are accepted. I mean, there is no such thing. You don't even know that there's a separation.
Yeah.
You know, that place is like we're talking about, you know, divisiveness. But when you live here, right?
Yeah.
People walk in and they're just like, hello, what an amazing thing just walked in, a human being.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, doesn't have to do with colors or anything. And then you get to hear the story that brought them down so often.
Yeah.
That individuated them and separated them and, you know, brought their energies low and eventually becomes dis-ease, you know, in their life. So that's really been my journey. That's who I am. I've been this all my life. And well, I had the opportunity when I was, you know, when I was at the University of California to be initiated into the anti-war movement. And I think what it did is it gave me, and I say this because I see so many books that have since come with something like getting to a yes, you know.
Yeah.
Like some self-help book, getting to yes. And I say, boy, yes isn't so difficult. Yes is actually what arises when you've gotten to know, when you've really gotten to know, N-O, with an exclamation mark, to the point where you're radicalized enough where you declare your no's. I'm not willing to take this anymore. That famous saying, which we did in the 60s when they were telling young boys like me at 18 years old, graduating high school in 1965, you know, to pick up an M15 or something. If you drop one unit in college, you're going to end up, you know, with being shipped over to Vietnam and, you know, or leave the country or go to jail or try and be a conscientious objector. I mean, it was insane. It was absolutely insane. And what it did was, wow, if we're just complacent, everyday, average kids like myself who had never been radicalized. I say radicalized because this radicalized is almost like when, oh golly, you know, when your anger and your grief, you know, run right up into the shame, you know, and there's this alchemy that happens and you suddenly make a paradigm shift completely. And you realize that everything you've been told now is under investigation. It's questionable. Yeah. It's absolutely questionable. And in the 60s, we could do that with tens of thousands of compadres. So we got an opportunity to see what it felt like in a collective merging of forces, the potency, the underlying potency that would coalesce. And it gave you permission also, you know, it gave you permission to take the risk of stepping out of conformity, big time conformity. I mean, up against your country and saying no to the U.S. government and all of our parents who were World War II vets. And we just sat there and you're telling me kill or be killed for a war that myself, being a political science major at the time and an economics major at the University of California, was obviously not only unjust, but we became wise to something deeper, something deeper about the colonialism of this country and the world, and start to look deeper and deeper, and you start realizing the colonialism of yourself. Because in many ways, out of that movement, out of that anti-war movement, grew what we call still today, I think, somewhat the human potential movement. Because that war just brought up for the first time, the rage, the collective rage that was still there after the war was over. And people started asking, well, what is this now? What's the next layer? So it's kind of like you went from the oppression, the overlord, the oppression of the totalitarian to the individual suppression and repression, down to the family and down to looking at, the church and the schools. And, oh my gosh, it just, to this day, I raised a daughter and you have a couple kids and, and I went to school and I did well in school and I did well in sports, but what an idea, well, you're an A student, well, you're a C student. Sorry, you're a D student. I mean, the inhumanity is so deep, and yet we take it all as if it's that's just what we do in school to give a person a sense of where they stand. It's like, huh?
Right.
And who's the they that you're talking about? And do you have any idea what the repercussions are? You do as a psychiatrist. That's actually what I had that first time I met you. And you're sitting here telling me, and I'm going, I love this guy. This is what I do. I love this guy. Take the labels off, first of all. Stop putting people into boxes. First of all, we're an extraordinarily expansive beings. I mean, we should be living in expansion and in gratitude, in abundance. I spent the last 50 years, just journeying down through my body, my psyche, my shadow. Oh man, all the stuff that was all perpetrated upon, mostly as young children. And when you start to free that up, and you take people out in nature, take them down by the ocean, they don't have any more attentive deficit disorder.
Right.
The chemicals inside our bodies shift. And actually, we start getting, serotonin highs. We start getting dopamine highs. We can actually start getting DMT highs on the natch. I mean, people will start walking down like we used to in the 60s. We'd go, okay, we're actually going to say no. We're going to take our clothes off and go skinny dipping and say no to all this attitude towards nudity and sexuality and perversity. I mean, we did so many wonderful things to break the rules. And the stuff that showed up was extraordinary, just extraordinary. So I had all these years where I did this deep work on myself. And then suddenly I got called in after I got out of, I didn't know what to do. I finished school and I had to jump into something. So I jumped into law school. Thank God. It's funny how some things turn out for the best, in the war, actually, they called me in and I had to go get a physical. And so I went to my doctor and I had a whole bunch of CAT scans on my neck, which I had fallen on many times in my younger years, especially as a competitive gymnast and as an acrobat and as a really, really high performing athlete, skiing and I was a competitive diver. And so I had migraine headaches. I had terrible numbness in my fingers, right side of my face. It was a little bit droopy. And I said, well, I better go check this out. Maybe something on a CAT scan. And sure enough, there were spurs the size of like the last digit of my little finger. I mean, they were major and C3, 4, 5. And I had some little herniation in my discs and I had spicules. And they said, this could only have come from a hard hit. These are actually bone fragments. And they said, it looks like right here, you may have had a slight stress fracture in your neck. I said, could you write all that up, please? Please put that in a letter, to whom it may concern. And as I took that down to the selective service, and of course, they gave me a physical deferment. And they said, sorry, we're not good, son, they actually said, sorry.
Right.
This colonel says, I'm so sorry, son, we're not going to be able to take you. I walked out of there. And first thing the next morning, I dropped out of law school, but that afternoon I went down to Santa Monica Beach, Santa Monica, California, for those listening from far away. And I just went running down, the beach and I'm screaming. And then I realized I haven't really made a decision about my life in my adult life because I've been spent all my time in school really trying to stay out of the Army. In other words, I've been stuck in no a lot. No, I'm not going to go in the Army, so I better stay in school, which is kind of a shame. I really probably could have, well, I might not have gone to school. I might have done something else and come back later, But no, you couldn't do that. You couldn't, you had to stay right there. So I came out and I went back to the doctor. And of course, I said, thank you. And he said, it worked. And he said, well, Harvey, you'd need a surgery. This is kind of like when in your work, somebody's saying, well, sorry, no, you need to be on these meds, I'm sorry, you can't live without these meds for the rest of your life. And probably after a few years, we need to give you another one because you're going to start to get, anyway, compensatory shuffles. And so I said, and this is so eventually looking way back, because I'm now 73 and I was, 22 years old. And so I said, well, no, I think I'm going to do it my own way. I've got some ideas. He just looks at me like, what? I said, no, just thank you. He says, well, you're going to be paralyzed perhaps by the time you're 26 because these things are going to grow and they're going to go right into your spinal cord. And, of course, I hadn't studied the work yet, so I didn't really know my anatomy, which was probably a good idea, not knowing so much. And I took that, I escaped and went to northern Malibu. And I just dropped out of everything, and I let my hair grow long. It was already pretty long in my beard, which of course made my mother not want to get close to me, which was okay. I got to do that kind of part of my my breaking away from the family even further. And I started looking into things like organic gardening, and I started eating organic foods, and I started fasting, and I started doing yoga. This is 1970. There's not much of this around. And then I heard about this thing called bioenergetics. Alexander Lowen, and he was putting together, some friends of mine who were part of the underground resistance back in the war days was telling me about this stuff. And because everybody was looking to find places that we got, it's almost like somebody gave us a disease. The government gave us all this held in musculature, and it turned out, of course, went back through ancestors, of course. So anyway, I started doing these groups once a month for three days, and we would get into some really, really deep. Well, there's the anger, but it's when you get into grief. Grief hurts. I mean, when you go into really deep grief, you start feeling the grief of humanity. And that's certainly where I went, having been already, out there doing this kind of stuff, against the war. I mean, I was kind of in a collective state of consciousness. I was world-centric at this point, So I wasn't stepping into this from an egocentric place. I was world-centric. My heart had already been really open since a child, which made it very hard to grow up. And so we did this work. We got down to some really, really powerful parts of ourselves. And then I was doing a lot of LSD, and I was doing a lot of mushrooms, and I was doing a lot of peyote, but I was doing all this in ceremony, all this visionary work. And I was doing it in the state of a meditation that I had received from a friend who had been to Dharamsala, which was northern India, where the Tibetans were, a meditation for my neck, to actually visualize my neck with blue light already healed. And the reason it worked for me is because I didn't really buy into the doctors in the first place. Mm-hmm. Some part of me knew, which I now know how that works. We're born with a matrix, a blueprint that goes through it's like an embryological blueprint around which the body develops. It's what I do for a living, is talk to that blueprint. And in that blueprint never gets hurt. That's why when a person walks in to all the people that come to your podcast, I mean, they're all coming in, fully whole. And then what we're doing is we're doing the work to sort of recapture what's already there. Seems like a funny paradox. But that's in fact, something like a koan or something. It's sort of what happens. And so I'm meditating, and I'm walking on the beach, and for a year, I hardly saw anybody. I just ate my own vegetables. And I'm pretty much living all by myself in northern Malibu, and doing this once a month. I was doing these really heavy workshops, going down into my body armor, as Wilhelm Reich called it. And then I heard about Rolfing. So I went and I immediately went to get Rolfed. And I did it on the 5th day of a fast. And of course, I did it on psychedelics. And I had the most amazing cathartic, sort of revelatory experience on the table. Which basically what I did in today's trauma work is I bounced on the table. I just bounced and I shook. And I went back home after that first session. And the next morning I woke up and all my cheeks were like white. Pus was coming out. It was just all my lymph glands under my arms. Everything was draining. And over the next 5 days, I went up to 105 temperature, which I stayed and I continued to fast, the master fast, they called it. Lemonade, maple syrup, and cayenne. I did that for 10 days. And then I think my temperature got up to 105.5. It finally broke. I went in for a couple more sessions. And then I started having, while I was in bed, I started having these extraordinary vaults of energy going up and down my spine. Didn't know what it was. It's 1971. I've never heard of the word Kundalini. I went to a place called the Bodhi Bookstore, which somebody said, go there and talk to them about it. Because I was getting these things and I was waking up in the morning and I was feeling like I had this complete sense of clarity and I could see with my eyes closed before I even woke up in the morning. I was having out-of-body experiences and I went and they told me, they gave me one book. There was one book. There probably is a whole bookstore now full of Kundalini books. There was one book and I read it and it was by a guy named Gopi Krishna. And sure enough, this process, this alchemical process that I was privy to, I was blessed with, went on for many months. I continued to get Rolfed. I continued to do these amazing visionary quests, pretty much solo on the beach, just with my dog, actually, in those days. After a year, they called me back in. Turned out I had a 1-year physical to be reviewed in 12 months. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh my God. So I went back to the doctor and said, I need a set of CAT scans in another letter. By the way, I haven't had any migraines at all since after like the 3rd or 4th session. I was taking codeine number 4s all the time. Mm-hmm. I could barely get through school. I mean, I'd be doped out on codeine, which is Mm-hmm. And so I haven't had anything. I haven't taken any medications. And my body's totally clear. I'm vegetarian, and at that time I'm not anymore. But I'm vegetarian and just eating my own vegetables and fasting, and once a month for like 3 or 4 days. And so I go back to him, and he takes my CAT scans and calls me up and says, "Come on in." And I come in, and he says, "Harvey, this doesn't happen often. I've never seen it. It's written about in the journals, but you had a miraculous, spontaneous healing." He said, "There's not a single speck of indication that you have any spurs. That little scar in the bones cleared up. All the spicules are gone. The herniated discs have disappeared." He said, I said, "Well, that's not a miracle, Tim." I said, "It's miraculous, but it's not a miracle." I look back, God, where do I even know these words from? But it's like, and I'm sitting there talking to him as I'm talking to him. Of course, he's looking at me. He happens to have been the head of internal medicine over at Cedars. He was also the father of my high school girlfriend. So I knew him. He has kind of a little bit of a father image. He kind of looks at me, gives me a little bit of shame on you smile. And he said, "Harvey, you're sounding very, very ridiculous for a college graduate." Like I'm a college graduate, so I can't be ridiculous. It's like, it was so perfectly, right out of the 50s, 60s, Leave It to Beaver, mm-hmm. Film. And he says, "Harvey, it can't be. Those things are dangerous. Those things aren't good for you. You're going to get yourself in deep trouble." And I just let him go on because a part of me, for the first time I ever saw this, I looked at him and went, "Oh my God, there's no way he could take this in. Because this, it would endanger his entire life, right?" Mm-hmm. All that he worked for, all that he studied, all that he lived for.
Yeah.
it's like you just had, there's a thing called the miraculous healing. If you actually let go of the congested pain in my throat, is what I really come down to, a lot of it. Certainly there was the physical, but my father, who was a narcissist, spoke for everybody in the family. I finished until I met the anti-war movement and I got to start saying no. A lot of that no was no to my father, no to the absolute abandonment of every time, I said, hey, Dad, I want to talk to you about something. And within a minute, he took the conversation over. All of those times, when this loving person completely breaks your trust, and yet they're your father. So all I have is this confusion in my throat because he took the voice away from me. And when that happens, it creates a congestion, right? A condensation of energies that literally create bone spurs. That's what they create.
Wow.
Bone spurs don't just happen,
Wow.
There's a combination. Fred, I've seen, I've been doing this, I really work a full practice. I figure I've probably done 75,000 hours, with people on my table over the last, 49 years of practice, 47 full time. I've come to really, when I first heard this stuff, it was intellectual. But when you learn to actually put your hands on it and feel a bone spur, because you feel what they call the inertial fulcrum. Inertial fulcrum is that we have these natural fulcrums in our body that we develop around energetically, embryologically. And then when we have impacts, emotional, physical, that are overwhelming to us, and they're overwhelming, sometimes just physical, you could just get a fastball smacked you in the head, while you're playing with somebody you really love, but oftentimes there's an emotional piece to it also. And all of that gets recorded in the body. The Body Keeps the Score is a great book that's out right now. And that all gets put in there. It all gets condensed into these things called inertial fulcrums. And the body creates a whole episode of energetics around it in order for the body to survive and maintain this thing called, an inertial vector. Basically, it's a force vector that's held in your body. Sometimes they call them energy cysts. And we collect them all over our body. And one of my cranial teachers used to say probably 80% of our life force is actually being used to maintain, our history, and perhaps even ancestral history, because now we're finding out, as I've always thought, all that stuff that comes through you got an egg and you have a sperm and they come together. Most people don't think about it, but just for the audience, it's all fluid. All this is fluid with a lot of electromagnetic activity and actually a lot of intelligence. So in there is actually a blueprint for how your body's going to be. And then the genes are just the building blocks. But you have to have a blueprint to build a house. So in there's this energetic blueprint, but you can't see it. There's no bones. There's no fingernails. There's no hair. There's no nothing. And so all this fluid creates this body. Embryogenesis is the mystery, is the miracle itself. And if anybody ever needs to want to just try to contemplate, what it might mean to have that there's something out there that's beyond, there's divinity, there's spirit, there's Godhead, or just pure universal intelligence that we are somehow particulated from in a form that's passing down an egg and a sperm, which carries all of our ancestors, So, maybe past lives, but certainly our ancestral energies. So, we carry a lot. It's so mysterious. Oh my gosh. So whenever we, even in those first 9 months, all of the mother's feelings, all of her emotions, all of who she is. When my daughter was born, it was an emergency C-section, and I was sitting there, just completely frozen and fixated when the doctor gave me the baby, and the lovely gynecologist OBG that delivered her, because it was going to be a home birth, and it turned out it saved both their lives. But she just walked up and said, well, Harvey, the baby's been listening to you for 9 months, so she knows you. So just talk to her. And I was like, I just melted. Oh, hi. It's great to see you on the outside, kind of thing. But she's like, there's just this thin little membrane that for so long we didn't consider this baby as having a full history already, when they're born. So, so we come in and we have discovered that we collect an awful lot. And there is this wave that takes place about 2 weeks after conception. And it's recorded. It happens right down the center of the egg. It's called a primitive streak. And embryologists know it. It becomes a spinal cord eventually. But when it first goes down, mysteriously shows up, it is the first sort of electromagnetic wave that potentiates this egg that's been fertilized. And it moves all the way out through the entire egg. This wave does. And when it hits the membrane, part of it comes back to the midline. Part of it continues out a little ways and then comes back in. That's oftentimes called the energy field around the body, the aura or field. And another part continues all the way out and comes back in much slower. So that one moves about 2 to 3 times every 100 seconds. And the one that goes just beyond the body comes back in and out for the rest of our lives 2 or 3 times a minute. And then the faster one, 8 to 10 times a minute. But the one that goes all the way out actually is the one that came in originally. It's the incarnation wave, right? It's that which incarnated and brought with it. It's called the breath of life or God's breath. Sometimes called the long tide in more medical terms, but it's the breath of life. It continues up until about 2 hours after we pass away. And it's what I listen to when I put my hands, or when somebody even just walks in the door. You learn to feel it. And when somebody lays on my table, I put my hands close to their head and I move right into that wave. It's very subtle. But once you feel it, I feel it from my own wave, my own embryological wave. And my embryological wave is now listening to their embryological wave. And this third thing happens. And that's oftentimes called alchemy or, miraculous healings. But that's kind of what happens in that moment. It ignites in our bodies. We all have this, a self-organizing principle. Because that wave is listening to me, listening to it, listening to me, listening to it. We've both encountered each other fully. We've disappeared and we become one wave. And this other third thing, which oftentimes, they say when two people encounter each other at that place, there I'll be. And that is probably evolution itself. And it self-organizes the person on the table. It actually brings that beat that's out of beat, okay? That tuning fork. That is the ultimate tuning fork. And in order for one to actually be with their tuning fork, we have to step out of the faster waves, which is more of our personality, and move into the slower wave, which we can do. There's a saying, be still and listen. Don't even be still. And listen, just be still. Don't even be still, just be. Mm-hmm. So that's oftentimes what we call pure presence. When we go down into that place where we slow down. And that's really, if I was to say that I do this podcast, because I don't like doing podcasts, but I said, I'll do this for Fred just so we can say hello. And because, your audience, this is a different audience. These are people who are doing trainings. These are people who are working on themselves. These are people doing the work. This isn't spiritual bypass stuff. You have to do the work. And if there's one thing I tell people, and when I first met my wife, I say, okay, you got to go do the training. And we did trainings and trainings and trainings for 30 years. Oh my gosh, there's no substitute. This life is divine. Don't pass it up, Stay healthy, eat good food. Don't get addicted. It's just like it's not worth it. It's too incredible. And you got to go down and compost. And I, ever since I was a farmer, I say, you got to compost all that old archive, all that old ancestral childhood. There's so much from the schools, from parents who didn't know any better, maybe, to churches, to the social collective, to the historical collective, and to just move ourselves along in terms of evolution. Because right now we have this opportunity, to be part of humanity and not be tribal. Mm-hmm. So, golly, yes, welcome to humanity. Yes, wow.
Welcome to humanity.
God bless you, Fred. So, God bless you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And really, I'm left kind of speechless. And on the back end of your introduction, this really approximately 40-minute introduction of who you are, I'm left just in awe. And I'm also left in deep and total human gratitude for the work that you've done with you and with people and with humanity. And it's not simply only the work that you've done on your table, because I've been fortunate enough to be a client on your table before.
A receiver.
A receiver, yes. And
by the way, I'm the receiver too when you're receiving. You know that, of course.
Yes, it is the dance. It is
the dance. Yes, that's the Layla. That's the dance.
It is the dance. Yeah. It's the dance of listening to me, listening to you, listening to me. The alchemy that then creates the really natural and correlated, effortless self-organization that represents true and honest, bold healing from the core up. I mean, that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And this is a different sphere. This is not the space from whatever you just said, the other listeners, whatever you call them. This is not a place for that group to be able to take a bite out of. This is something about the majesty of what this opportunity is of this life upon arrival until we're into the next astral plane. And you're tapping into that. Harvey, I've never really met anybody, and I'm pretty sure there isn't very many people who have worked it so honestly and so boldly and so irreverently and so meticulously and so intelligently, getting yourself to the places where you were saying no. You were saying no,
Yes.
You were saying no with authority, like no, that answer is no there. And exploring not necessarily a yes, but a yes to the adventure and exploration of what life had to offer as you became the healer you have now, bless us with.
Now there's a lot of yes. There's not a lot of yes now. Life's about yes at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, that is just amazing. So
can I share a story with you?
I can't wait.
I've never said. So this is sort of the inside of, the healer and the healy, and they disappear, and you're on my table for the first time. Can I share this?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Sure. So you're at the table. After you shared yourself, I thought, oh, okay, this works. This is going to be interesting to see where this goes. And the next thing, I started saying, so what's up? And, you start talking to me about this walkabout you're going to do in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, right? And
yeah.
And I'm thinking, okay, well, that's cool. And you just walked in, but you also told me about your knee and your ankle. And I'm going, okay, so he's not talking the usual story. I need you to fix this in order for me to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. He didn't go there. See, I picked that stuff up because that's the stuff that I don't listen to. I was listening to you directly, speaking what I was saying in my head. Okay, Harvey, don't go there. Go to. So I'm doing this walkabout, and I need a team with me because I need some facilitation so that my legs will be there because they're totally capable. And I'm going, he got it. Mm-hmm. You were already in shape in the future, in the present.
Exactly.
So you held that, you were holding that, but so fully, because you didn't know that I kind of threw a little left and a little right and going, okay, he's got this.
Mhm.
He's not going into like, yeah, I know what you mean, Harvey, because I could just fall and die after about 2 miles, and you just, no. You were just like in fact, you were getting more excited,
Mhm.
It's like you were doing the walk on my table.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
And I just I want to share that back to you, that how
Yeah, I love that. I didn't recall that was the moment that I came into I don't have recall like that. But I will say something. Let me say something about that walk. It's the Israeli National Trail is the INT, and it runs from the northern end of I think Dan, Israel, all the way down to Eilat, and it has its own path, and it some sort of 2 or 3 month walk if you do it casually, and it's there's angels along the way to take care of you, much like El Camino, I guess, but it's more of about, I think El Camino is slightly more famous to at least the secular crew, and this idea of really getting that done, even last year, it was sort of canceled with our most recent perceived outbreak that we are all now going through. And there's this, I just read yesterday something about international travel opening up a little bit. If you keep your eye, if you keep your eye open there, international travel is possible all of a sudden. And, you don't have to quarantine when you arrive. All of a sudden, it's like,
yeah, things just shifted. There's a shift. There's been a shift, hasn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah, in the field.
It's almost like, okay, if you have to do one more thing, y'all, if you have to do one more thing, now would be a good time to consider doing that. And so you just relit exactly what happened and what it's like, oh yeah, I guess I could go to Dan, Israel and take this walk. It would not be a bad time to do that. So
yeah, because maybe it was about this time of last year that you and I
exactly
encountered each other.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So Harvey, it's really been a year of, we've had these terrific conversations, the work you did on My Body and My Spirit, the friends and colleagues and teachers and gurus, and even co-referrals that we've had have been extraordinary. And now the listeners really have an opportunity to have heard the core, a really beautiful story of how you wound up being who you are now. To at least one thread that leads to how you ended up being who you are now.
Exactly.
So what's next for you, Harvey? I mean, what do you see? I mean, what's happening in these next minutes, days, weeks, months, years, decades,
so
centuries?
Wonderful you asked this question. Thank you, Jack. The only thing is that Fred, if you I was saying Jeff because I have a friend Jeff who's always saying, so what are you doing? Well, I really appreciate because these are things that these are questions. For me at 73, so I went through, which is that'd be for another hour or two, and maybe a book, which I'm actually working on, by the way. So that's something.
Cool.
But after I was given the extraordinary honor to go work with Ida Rolf and all of these amazing teachers, and I chased them, and I traveled, and I basically went 7 days a week, and one of the things that happened in my life was people died. Family members died, people fell away, a lot of tragedies. My wife and I and my daughter have stayed so close through it all. It's actually there've been crucibles, unbelievable crucibles. And because of who we are, we jumped in, and who I am, and people would say, Harvey, I can't believe what a choice you made to take care of your nephews and adopt them, and your schizophrenic brother who went on the streets, and and on and on and on. My father went bankrupt, and I take my mother in. And then these colleges and just the kind of stuff that I took on required me to, and I tell you, I'm so grateful for learning when I was younger, because I wasn't always so responsible. But boy, if there's one thing you learn in that training, and then what training we're talking about and other trainings, is one of the most powerful things in life. There's a lot of them that go off in every direction. They're kind of like the core that all these other things are unfolded into, And one of them is knowing how to make an agreement. Mm-hmm. So once you come up with your purpose in life, that's kind of an agreement, right? Mm-hmm. That's a holy agreement you made with yourself. Okay. And when you make those really, really deep, It's the holy grail of your life. When things come up, in a way you have agency, but you're muscle testing everything, and everything says, I got to go to the right. No, this is the way that life. My agreement is to go with my highest purpose. And that's my highest purpose. And I was flooded with the responsibility for years. So I'm working 6-7 days a week, and I'm wanting to constantly learn all the new techniques and study with all the teachers. And then they're asking me to teach. So now I'm assisting, and then I'm teaching, and I'm doing 7 days a week, 37 years later in that kind of a work since my daughter was born, and it built up. I paid off my mortgage. All the kids are gone. A lot of people have passed away. I'm just my wife and I. She's my darling, darling partner. And I am like doing something which I was walking this morning, and I was saying, this is, Susan, that in a way that was fearless, but it wasn't. I didn't know, I could not do the kind of responsibility that I took on. Okay. Right. You understand that, right? I mean,
I do.
Yeah, well, Harvey, it was really admirable. Okay. I mean, yeah, thanks. Thank you. And I feel good about having done it because I don't have regret. Oh my God. I will say, if I can say anything to people all the time, do your life so when you get older, you don't have regret. It's not necessarily the easy way, but boy, do your stuff, do your service, because that's what it is. It comes back. Service is the most selfish thing you could do. It's not it's selfless, but it's selfish. I mean, you get back. So my life is very rich at this point. I really put in my time, and I'm like saying to my wife, the fearless thing for me right now is being in a state of just this beingness and emptiness. Okay. Of not taking on what I wanted to, not jumping in and writing classes. I can write the classes, not taking on responsibility, because what comes up is, who am I? I'm not trying to become successful anymore. I've done that one, and I did that one, and thank God for all the workshops that helped me. And by the way, one of the things that allowed me to get through the last 37 years, 47 professionally, but the first 10, I was being in my full-fledged Playboy mode, but then responsibilities hit, and 37 years was I'd keep going back and doing workshops. I reviewed the landmark, which I had never done. For instance, I'd done all the S trainings over and over in the system, all these other actualizations trainings and all of this, a lot of Scientology. And I did these things because I wanted to be clear, because when you're clear, it's amazing the amount of things that can come through. There is no 1, 2, 3, 4. There's no moments in between. Life just unfolds when you actually have confronted all the things that intimidate you, all the things in your life that made you, cringe, right? And when you open up and get spacious, not only do you have so much more potency and energy coming through, and then you actually have to be careful that you don't burn yourself up, sort of, but also your place of love, and your place of luminosity, and your place of compassion. You just go 7 days. There's no such thing as, you actually don't even work anymore. I don't care. You could be a janitor, because the place where your heart opens up, but you have to do the work. And so I used to go back and just keep doing the work in order to get the energy. Like, I'd take off 4 days. That 4 days would pay me back, tenfold, right? Tenfold inside a workshop, where we're processing. Oh my gosh, I'd run across. I used to say, if I could find one good piece, that $1,000 or $2,500, was a discount, and boy, it definitely pays off. So that's where I am right now. I'm a little between and betwixt. I mean, I'm in between. I'm going through a new passage, because I really respect that idea, right? Yeah. So I'm actually stopping and I'm listening. And I just found on my bookshelf somebody 13 years ago. I think I mentioned this too, but I was so busy 13 years ago that one of the ways I would release myself is, after doing workshops, I'd take my recorder and I'd walk the hills with my dog, and I would just talk into my tape, my recorder, whatever came through, stream of consciousness. And this woman said, can I take that? Can I take all those tapes? And I gave them to her, and she edited them all, and she put them into a book, and I put it on my shelf, and I've never read it.
Wow.
And this podcast in a very, very interesting way, I was just been sitting around thinking about what's Fred, what's he going to talk? Well, we're going to probably talk about this. So, and I looked around and I said, I've done a few interviews. Maybe I'll read one of my old interviews and stuff. And I found that book and I pulled it out and I went, I've never looked at this. And I'm like struck. I'm struck by how beautiful it is. So I'm going to be working on that next. Thank you, Fred, for asking.
Oh my goodness! Well, if I could get in there as a little fly on the wall to assist you in working on that, it would be my honor.
Oh, bless you. Bless you.
Goodness, my goodness. I want to point to it. There's so many different places here, and before we shut down, there is a certain space that I think is so fascinating, at least for me, that's still lit. That I'd like you to go back and point to.
Yeah.
It's this thing. It's this self-organization. It's the deepest level of self-organization that you talked about. It's this effortless self-organization that arrives upon the listening or the alchemy, this core, bold alchemy. And I think when you were speaking to it the first time, when you rolled past it the first time, you mentioned something about the contractions, maybe the first contraction that happens minutes after our being born. And that with the work that you do, you can access at least some sort of not necessarily the trust, like you can undo the distrust, so the trust again arrives because the receipt is this request for receipt is satisfied. The request for the infantile receipt, you in your touching and your reading and your listening can actually satisfy the request for the receipt, which then creates the love and undoes the distrust that you mentioned, and points a little bit to that contraction that might take place upon the first denial of the request for the receipt, for a request for being received that the baby reaches for. Am I pointing to something here? Those first few minutes.
I'll give you a visual for it
That's what I want you to point to. I want you to give us that.
Just using that one. I mean, we can use any one, but since we'll use it without even having a direct impact, because I think the first. I think basic trust is really the first one of those first core wounds. Okay, that starts off the breaking us from our connection, to mother and God, who was really mom at that time, and we lose, and then we individuate, by pulling back, and then we try to protect ourselves from the pain of that denial, of the reaching out, which just like a puppy, and everybody knows animals, it's just natural in our bodies. Okay, but somehow, the nipple isn't there, or the hug isn't there, or just simply at 4 years old when you come home, and the first time, or somebody was telling me just the other day about, well, my dad was always there, boy, as long as I won the basketball game, but anytime I didn't win the game, it was silence driving all the way home, which are usually just a reinforcement of a much, much, much more primal experience. And the way Wilhelm Reich, put it, Alexander Lowen, his student, was that literally the baby, you might say, we used to do that in these workshops. You reach your hands out, right? You reach out. You literally reach out. And when it doesn't get received, there's some wonderful books showing how slowly the pain in the heart, and the heart connects all the way out to the end of the fingers. The pain in the heart pulls the fingers back in. Literally, the tentacles of our muscles and connective tissue start to contract, okay? They literally start to retract, and our heart that embryologically went from our throat dropped down along our spine and then comes forward, okay? And literally hangs from our throat with all these suspensory ligaments. It starts to pull back, okay? Literally starts to pull back to protect itself. So it's this protective mode that then and we can go on and on and on, but that's the contraction that when I put my hands on somebody 40, 50 years later, and all the other contractions that are built around that one to protect that pain, okay? Because the baby decides, I'm not going to cry anymore, because they're not even responding to crying. So now the baby goes passive. And you wonder why somebody doesn't have any, get up and go, And and pretty soon can't pay attention because the world has we've lost the world. That baby is no longer in the world. It's become disassociated. Okay. And so it literally disappears into this other place that's just biologically surviving. But the body holds that. And if you can go in, this is the beautiful thing with a lot of this trauma work, but in the deep biodynamic cranial work, it's been discovered by this guy Sutherland and then all these wonderful keepers of the information. And I was privy to be able to learn it. You put your hand down there, just anywhere under the chest, you can listen to this tide that holds is connected to that memory. It connects to the memory all the way back of that contraction. It might even have visuals. I've had people sit there and bounce on the table and curl up in a little ball in utter pain and terror. I mean, I had this one lady, she's a doctor from Harvard, and she's sitting there, and she's, Harvey, I'm so scared. Everything's so dark, and I'm shaking, and my legs hurt so much. And I said, just, can you trust me? And she goes, I'm trusting. And I'm sitting going, I hope this works. This is supposed to work. And, 5 minutes later, the system, what happens is it goes back in. And under my hands, this wave, you feel a wave. It's like a breath. It actually expands and it contracts back in. And it goes through the fluid body, of which we're like 60 to 70% fluid, actually travels through the fluid body, and you feel it like a wave. And as it goes back in, it starts to wander through, you might say, all of the stories. It is its own intelligence. It's not some biological piece that's connected to our normal intelligence. It's its own intelligence. We have lots of intelligences. It's its own intelligence. It's there. It lives in there to keep us evolving. It's actually evolution. It's the evolutionary surge within each person. And what it is, that tide is pulsating with larger cosmological waves. That's why it goes all the way out into the collective and comes back in. It's part of a larger, and it comes back in and breaks down into the body. But if you listen to it, okay, it carries with it this very, very old, 2 million year old, evolutionary force. And it has in it this most mystical thing called a self-corrective intelligence. So we, as the practitioner, we don't try to assess and fix. It's way more intelligent. You got to get out of the way. This is a great example of just get out of the way and listen. But listen so deep that it's listening to you. The second that you start to, like a deer in the woods, second you start to force your eyes at it, but if you can just be with it, it likes beingness. It is beingness. It is pure presence, and it meets your presence. And it sets up this self-organizing process where you start to feel the body shake inside, deep, deep down shake. Sometimes the whole body shakes. It might start to rock, and then the whole piece turns off. And that's what's oftentimes referred to. I mean, Rumi talks about it in his poems, still point. You drop down into a still point where everything goes quiet. All of the forces in your body, all of the history of your personality, all of the pieces that broke away from that first moment of basic trust where you broke. Okay, you broke from your own spirit. Because at that time, your spirit and mom's spirit were connected. When she broke, you didn't get a chance to do what, in psychology is what's it called? It's called anyway, it's something about, a healthy individuation, right? Which never happens, but that's what it basically, what happened is you didn't individuate. We eventually individuate, but we do it from a complete contact of love, never broken by mom or dad or, but anyway, that piece gets broken. And now we get a chance that's the beauty, Fred. We get a chance to renegotiate that moment. Yes.
That's amazing.
In that still point, it goes into this, what's called a dynamic self-organization. Literally, the body comes back into a new place. It drops into a deeper evolution. Part of that stomach relaxes. Your heart moves forward. Your fingers, the contractions let go for a bit. And it's a lot for somebody to get, especially if they haven't done a lot of work. What I love is people who've done a lot of work, and then they come in and I'm able to bring this other piece, this physical, psychic, metaphysical, cosmological piece into their organization Whoa, it's beautiful.
Right. If you haven't done the work, then it's going to be way out in front of where you are. And if you've done the work, this is like a way to almost catch it up to what has been done already.
That's right. It's graduate work in a way. But although sometimes it's just an introduction too, and there's nothing wrong with introducing somebody, right?
For sure.
For sure.
For sure. All right.
Yes, you got it.
Yeah, Harvey, we could, of course. I look forward to our next conversation. I actually think that we should have another one right here on this podcast. And it's where you're just you're an amazing individual. And if in fact you are an individual, we could also say that you're an amazing part of me. You're an amazing part of this life of mine. And, I just thank you. And the timing, of course, the synchronicity of this arrival of this next conversation we just had today is exquisite. It's extraordinary. And all of life is. And we did, this was actually the hour for Harvey to show. It's like, this is Harvey. This made so much sense that Harvey is my next encounter. So really, 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 really beautiful. You're a beautiful man. And so glad to be on the planet at the same time as you, Harvey Ruderian. So glad.
I feel you, Fred. I feel you deep in my heart. Thank you.
Really something.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank you. God bless you. Yeah.
All right, Harvey, we'll catch you on the flip side. Thank you, listeners. And you too, you just take care of yourself, take care of your family, take care of taking care. And remember, really what we have here is just humanity. That's all it is. And so welcome to humanity. Stay well. Bye for now. Is Harvey Ruderian like the most interesting person you've ever met? I mean, the guy is just mesmerizing. And I've been a client of his or a receiver of his before, and it's even more amazing in that setting. So what I'm walking away with is just the honor and the glory and the privilege it is to be friends with such a master. Maybe as you were listening to this, you thought of a person or maybe even two or three who absolutely need to hear this episode. I mean, why not reach out to them right now and invite them to listen and to subscribe to the Welcome to Humanity podcast? And while you're at it, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the same podcast, the Welcome to Humanity podcast. It has a huge impact. Please take a moment and hit the subscribe button on your podcast player. That way you'll get the latest episodes as they become available. If you're really appreciating what we do, go ahead and take 5 minutes to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. As it turns out, reviews and subscribes are the two major ways we can reach more listeners with this Welcome to Humanity podcast. And if these conversations that we're having here contribute to your life, go ahead and pay it forward by subscribing and leaving a wonderful review. And to catch up on past episodes, head on over to welcometohumanity.net/podcast. So until next time, this is Dr. Fred, and this has been another wonderful edition of the Welcome to Humanity podcast. Thanks for listening, and have a beautiful day. Catch you on the flip side.